Welcome to the program. Oil prices down after a report that the Iranian oil minister won't be attending the Doha meeting on Sunday. And Gabon, small West African country, plans to rejoin OPEC after more than 2 decades. Plus, the World Bank IMF spring meetings begin officially today in Washington. Good afternoon and welcome to the program. This is Business Incorporated. I am Bosin Amafai. I'm live to you from the Channel's global headquarters in Lagos, Nigeria. Let's start from the world of oil. Prices erased earlier gains and moved firmly lower early on Friday after a report that the Iranian oil minister will not be attending the highly anticipated meeting in Doha on Sunday. Crude oil prices lost 1.3% to $40.99 a barrel, while Brent was down 1% to $43.46. Iran has rejected calls for an output freeze among oil producers, arguing that Tehran wants to return to pre-sanctions levels before reining in production. The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, has signaled it won't agree to any deal in Doha unless Iran signs on it. Meanwhile, the finance minister of major oil exporter Russia has poured cold water on any hopes for a deal, saying that they do not expect any changes in price in spite of the negotiations which are being conducted currently with oil extracting countries. Non-OPEC member Russia is one of the world's largest oil exporters, but its economy has been hit by low oil prices and international sanctions imposed on it for its annexation of Crimea and its role in the pro-Russian uprising in East Ukraine. Here in West Africa, Gabon wants to rejoin the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, after more than 2 decades, becoming the second former member in a year to seek a return to the oil exporters group, just as the country takes the first step in years to prop up oil prices. If Gabon returns, it will be the smallest producer in the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and brings its ranks to 14 countries, following last year's return of Indonesia, which quit the cartel in 2008. Gabon joined OPEC in 1975 and left in 1995 after the exporters group's refusal to grant Gabon's request for reduced annual contributions in line with the country's small oil production. The move to rejoin comes as key OPEC members and outside producers, such as Russia, are attempting to support prices through a deal to freeze output among member states, which will be discussed this weekend in Doha. Let's get across the equities market. Asia closed mixed in the final trading day of the week amid muted reaction to China's gross domestic product numbers for the first quarter, which matched some forecasts. Australia's ASX 200 finished up 38 points after the energy and materials sub-indexes reversed losses of nearly 1% in early trade. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 snapped a 3-session winning streak on the back of a relatively weaker yen. The benchmark index was down 63.02 points. Across the Korean Strait, the Kospi closed down 1.22 points. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index finished down 21.34 points. Chinese markets ended lower, with the Shanghai Composite down 3.90 points. The Shenzhen Composite ended negative 3.86 points. And a nail-biting trading week comes to an end today. Let's head to Frankfurt Stock Exchange, a live discussion with Javier Aguedas, who's been on this week roller coaster market with us here on the program. From Frankfurt, Javier Aguedas, DWTV financial correspondent for Channels Television. Good afternoon, Javier. Thanks to a nail-biting trading week coming to an end. Bittersweet earnings, economic data from Asia, China to be precise, Brexit in Europe. Summarize it all for us from your perspectives in Frankfurt.
Hi, Bosun. Well, this week we actually saw a very important change of perspective on how things are actually going in the worldwide economy. At the beginning of the week, we had information that suggested that it was not going that well, especially if we consider that the International Monetary Fund, for example, had just reduced the predictions for global growth. We saw some numbers that were not really encouraging about the inflation rate here in the Eurozone, which is actually not getting any better as opposed to what we might have thought, considering all the efforts that the European Central Bank is having. So all in all, the mood was not quite good. And then came China. China came with its import and export figures, which were, as we know, much better than expected. So this actually showed 2 things to investors. First of all, that China is buying more products, which is very important because that means that many companies will continue to gain money and to earn money through their exports to China. But most importantly, it also showed that China is importing more, is buying more, and that always shows us that the world economy, that all other countries apparently are also buying more, and that means that there is strength in the economic system. So that was definitely a little bit of a shift there. We saw some strong gains in the markets on Wednesday and on Thursday. Today we saw that that tendency started to change. Many investors are deciding to keep those gains, to keep the money that they made out of those valuable stocks that increased their value throughout the week. So that's why we're seeing some slight losses towards the end of the week. But all in all, especially here in Frankfurt, people can be quite happy because the DAX, the main German index, finally broke the 10,000 mark, which is psychologically important. And as it seems, it is going to maintain that.
Yes, but from the oil market space, it's been a little bit jumpy. So we're now down to the final 72 hours to the Doha meeting. Is Iran attending? Can Russia and Saudi Arabia pull this off successfully if Tehran is not in the room?
Well, that is, of course, the big question. At the beginning of the week, we saw some statements by the Russian oil minister, energy minister rather, who said that he didn't see very much clarity on how this deal is going to work and how it's going to look like. So that was something that was not quite encouraging. But in the end, we know that this initiative of limiting the oil supply is definitely in the interest of all the exporting countries, not only those who are negotiating, but to all exporting countries. So in the end, it would make sense. At least that's what many say. The problem, of course, is the position of Iran. We already knew that this was a very difficult situation because Iran wants to re-enter the market and, of course, doesn't want to limit production now. What we do have to take into consideration are two things. First of all, that investors are already counting on this deal happening. If it doesn't come to a fruitful end, then we will see some major disappointment in many of the markets, and especially, of course, in the oil and energy industries. And the other thing is that even with a deal, this is not going to make that much of a difference because we know that the production at the current level is already in record highs. So actually limiting it would not make that much of a difference. What would make a difference, but that's definitely not going to happen, would be if the countries decided to reduce their oil production. But that is still a very, very long time and a long way to go to that.
Yes, a very long way out here. But what will be on the top of the agenda for next week?
Well, next week will continue to give us more clarity on how that first quarter actually looked like. We know that there were some surprises this week, including JP Morgan in the banking sector in the United States. Next week, we will see some interesting numbers. Yahoo, for example, because we know that it is in the midst of selling its company divisions. That is going to be a very interesting one to watch. And also other big players like Amazon that are already indicators of how the economy in the U.S. is going. So we will continue to see that business report season full on during the next week. We don't know if that is going to bring good or bad surprises. At the beginning of this report season, the experts said that it would be rather disappointing, but as we know, some of the numbers of the overall development in the economy suggest that the first quarter wasn't actually that bad. So in other words, it is going to be very exciting, Bosa.
Very exciting next week after Sunday's Doha meeting. Javier Aguirre, do have a great weekend, and the rest of the DW TV team in Frankfurt, from all of us here in Lagos.